which is another set of people who need help with literacy. Well, I know my grandmother, to this day, still can't understand how to get onto the internets, as she calls it. And you've heard about senators calling it a system of tubes. And it is confusing. And again, if you ever tried to use Windows, just that alone can be very challenging for some people. But use of the internet can foster the sharing of information. Now, this is not so much a teaching tool, but I found this website, Fiction Alley, and where people submit Harry Potter type fiction. And what it does is it gets kids writing, and it gets them sharing their work, getting critiqued by each other, and it ends up doing a lot of interactive work. So, now, not all programs are equal. Now, we've heard about some great programs here that are being offered. Some of the presenters, the workshop presenters, were showing some of the great programs that exist. I think Alpha Plus is one of them. There you go. So see, there's some. See, you know, that's good stuff. I'm not talking about your stuff, but I'm talking about other programs that have been tested that didn't work as well as yours. Thank God. In a study of 13 of the 47 programs used by provincial and territorial ministries of education, they found that most helped only indirectly. Publishers will say, this will help kids build literacy. This will teach them how to write. I think there was one that came out in '97. That's the Ultimate Writing and Creativity Center. Well, Microsoft Word provides more help or advice on how to write. And what all these programs do is that they give a little bit of help, but really it's the teacher who guides the students. It's the teacher who makes it work. You can't just stick the student in front of the computer and say, learn to read. It doesn't work quite that well. But ICTs can be used to support primary literacy, the first reading. Computer-based tutorials like talking books, like Leapfrog, teaching keyboarding skills, they can do that. And that's very useful. Again, it helps because students can reinforce what they learn in the classroom. And that's the thing, the ICTs can help by learning that way, to reinforce what you learn in the classroom. They can also help with distributed systems. I mean, there's interactive radio instruction that's been used throughout the second and third world. Online adult education programs, such as Literacy Link in Eastern Ontario, providing links for all the resources that people can use. Or even the use of artificial intelligence now, like AutoTutor, that actually learns from people. There's, even the project such as the Listen Reading Tutor that was used in a study in Ghana and Zambia in Africa. And it really helped, as you can see on the right there. 2 of the 3 schools had really big results. The orange color is the ones those who gained fluency by using the Listen Reading Tutor. They had substantial gains. There was one school where they had virtually no gains, and those were, or a little slight less gains, and those were students that were already very literate. So again, these programs are very good for students with very, very little literacy. And again, they're testing students, young children. These literacy programs never get tested on adults who can't read. It always seems to be tested on children because it's usually in an educational setting and that's where they have access. So that's one of the challenges, is figuring out what works for adults. Will computers work for adults? I'm sure they will, but what programs? One thing that computers can do, though, of course, is help the literacy practitioners, teachers, and educators themselves. A study by Ajayi with a community in southwestern California that had a predominantly Hispanic population brought together 44 instructors that were being in a course on how to teach children, how to teach literacy. And they used PowerPoint, website creation, and asynchronous discussion boards. In other words, that's when you post stuff up on a discussion board, it sits there, and people follow a thread and post to it and carry it on. And what they found, the author found, was that when these alternative licensed teachers shared their information, their real-life examples, talked about issues, they found they really got a lot of interaction, a lot of sharing. And they ended up posting like videos of their projects that they did and with students, and it was an easy way to reflect on what they know. So they learned from their peers. So that professional development and sharing of best practices, of course, something that literacy practitioners have been calling for many years. I'm not saying anything new. This kind of technology could help with the sharing of the information. But again, it's not a magic bullet. All it does is it helps people to communicate. So how can we integrate these ICTs better? Well, one of the things is we need better design of them. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about industrial design, it's an area I teach in, but talking about how designing and getting practitioners and educators and learners together in the same room is what's really needed. The challenges of industrial design is that one of the things is that the programs, people who design these programs, they do user groups, user testing, but there are people who are designing for people they don't know, to do things they're not sure about, for people they haven't seen, at a time they don't pick, with a budget they can't select. Yeah, sounds a little bit like government policy too. It's kind of, and that's why it's so hard for designers to design. Not because they're dumb, because they're not, but because it's very hard to design something that fits everybody. Because of course, as you all know, does everyone learn the same? There's some general principles that we can work on, but we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. So you need more user involvement, and you need to move to more creative and participatory approaches. What Sanders has called moving from being a customer up to being a co-creator. And what that means is drawing on users' creative abilities. It's the fuzzy front end of design. So what happens is that what she's talking about is saying that when you move from, doing, or I have a problem, I'll just use this program, or I'll adapt something, what you have is creating. When you're creating solutions, you get really involved. It's like when children create games. And many of the literacy programs that are involved with games tend to be around educational games. Like, you will put the letter here, you get a prize. But what if you had the children make the game to teach literacy? Get the older kids to say, how would you teach the younger kids? Or get someone who is literate or partially literate to figure out what would help someone else. Getting people involved in trying to solve problems often gets the creative juices flowing. And when people are creative, that's when they get the most engaged. That's when they get the most excited. So again, that moving from doing to creating could be useful. It's something designers have been starting to use now over the past 5 to 10 years. They use mock-ups, so they make something that looks like a fake version, a prototype, and then they test it. And sort of a way to see that is I worked on one project. This is not literacy-based, but this is looking at making an interactive museum guide. And what we did is we made up mock-ups, like the ones you see up top, and I apologize for the fuzziness. And what came out of that was the refined design concepts. So something to look at things, an all-purpose tool, where we're going to use discs with different colors. When we talk to people and we observe them in the actual environment using the museum, we set up a fake museum and had children and their parents using it, and we watched what works, what doesn't. We had the kids pick up things, and they started to mix and match things and say, well, this would be neat, and they came up with these interesting designs. We never did develop the spaceship that one boy came up with. And the other girl said that she wanted to have a whole princess land. I pushed for that. I like princess land. But what we found is what got parents and kids talking. What works? What doesn't work? And out of that came what would become known as Curio. And this is now at the Museum of Simon Fraser University through Jim Budd. And they actually made interactive pieces. And they're now actually being used in museums throughout Burnaby, BC. So that's how they work through a 3-year process of getting to an actual product that was based on people's ideas, users using them, and users coming up with solutions that we could never have thought of. So the other facet that I've talked about when saying about creativity and speaking of digital environments is also multiplayer online role-playing games. Now, I'm not advocating that we get everyone playing World of Warcraft in order to build literacy. I don't think it'll hurt, but well, it's kind of fun, but it's actually looking at the environment from a critical perspective. And in that way, I'm looking at it more as an anthropologist and as a designer, not as a player. The average player who plays these games is about 26 years old, male, may have left his parents' basement, plays in 22 hours per week. I always say that joke because I have a lot of friends who play games and they go, we have our own houses, we're grown up. Some of those games, such as Star Wars Galaxies, and you can look these all up on the web, is an actual game where you buy and trade in a corporation. You have to set up budget meetings and all this stuff. It's just like the work world, except you don't get paid. Or wait. There's a company by the name of IGE that actually has 100,000 gamers that play the game World of Warcraft, get gold and get things. They pay them to do this. Now it's in China, so they don't pay much. And then they sell that to people. You can buy 250,000 of World of Warcraft gold for $999 US. Same thing in Second Life. People buy and trade actual things from the game. And as Bolstorff notes, the information age has under our noses become the gaming age. And it's not surprising. That's one of the hottest areas in development today, games. And why? Same reason the internet has flourished as a haven for games and porn, entertainment. That's the primary reason humans are using technologies now, is for fun. But this fun can be used for work. Because what we see is that these are opportunities for learning. Instead of an instructionist perspective, we can take a constructionist perspective with education. Sotama did an example of modder behavior in games. And modders are basically people who, they take an existing computer game and they go, I'm going to change it and make another version, something new. I'll modify it. I'm a modder. And then people will buy this, or they'll download it for free. And you'll see all sorts of games that are released as a beta test. People will modify it, and then they'll incorporate the modder changes and sell that. The ability to get human crowd contributions can actually help even with computer programming. You've heard about open source code, things like Linux, OpenOffice, and of course the crowd computing and crowd solutions. Well, this is now the way that they're getting people to solve problems. They send a code, go, we can't figure out how to make this any better, play with it. And hackers and people will do so, and then give it back in a better form of code. You also have something known as the Mechanical Turk through MIT. They actually distribute small tasks to people. It's a little bit like the CAPTCHA idea, except that it's distributed to people and they get paid a few pennies to answer questions. So when before when you'd use Google and you'd say, I want to find something, oh, here's the top 300,000 results that are sort of tangentially related. Well, they get a real person to look, a real expert who says, oh, you wanted this. Wikipedia is another example where you do actually get demonstrated experts who will submit to Wikipedia that online information. The same thing could happen for instructing software development for literacy. People who really know how to do it, who have used it, or both, could actually contribute this kind of co-creation to say, here's what really works, or here's what works for us. Or could we have a standard literacy program, but here's the code, and if you're a literacy practitioner, you can take that and you can play with it and come up with the John Smith version or the Betty Sue version. You can play with it and make it suit your class. And then, if you submit it back to us, we'll give you X dollars. Programs like that might be one way that we could harness that creative ability, because of course all of you have immense creative capability. The other part to technology, of course, is not just the technology, but also the people. Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. A shovel that sits on the ground is nothing. It's just a shovel. A book that is closed is a brick. It takes a person to use it. That's why technology exists. Because of us. We make it for us, to do something to us, for us, or around us. So too, people are part of that solution. And one of the things that I've done some work in Aboriginal literacy, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about it, is that, in Aboriginal literacy, there's been a big push towards the promotion of holistic learning, that, literacy is more than just reading or doing math, that it's an approach to everyday life. They often call for integrating the community into a lot of literacy programs. Now, literacy, again, can tie into policy development. There was one study done on Fogo Island up in the north where they used video to show their conditions. Rather than sending in a piece to the local minister trying to explain why they need more funding, they took videos to show what their community was like. Policy advisors went, oh, wow. Because, they read all the time, and they were like, this is nice. This is a lot more interesting than reading yet another report. And they could really empathize with what they were seeing, and they could understand better where people were coming from. They call for using culturally relevant teaching materials, Aboriginal instructors, or more Aboriginally sensitive instructors. Again, the same thing applies with lots of literacy learners, whether you're of Euro-Canadian, English, French, pick your ethnicity. Having sensitivity towards your different ways of learning can be useful. The medicine wheel is, and this is put up by Eileen Anton, is one example of sort of this Aboriginal perspective on literacy. But why is that important? Well, holistic learning with cultural sensitivity, learning from elders, getting the community involved. Who wouldn't learn well in that kind of environment? Right? We all could. This is not something that's just good for Aboriginal people. It's good for everybody else too. Also looking at how professional support networks work. There was one study done by Docherty? I'm mangling her name, but they talked about their challenges as practitioners in Aboriginal communities, and they supported each other, but they also figured out their best practices in sharing. And what they found was that contextual hands-on learning worked best. And I put these in just because they're excellent bites to sort of capture how to use technologies. As a Saltu elder once said, good walking and good talking, doing. You have to do. And again, that's the advantage to an engaged use of ICTs, getting people involved in creating. I've sat in on design sessions where we've sat down